Hi, everyone.
Kia ora. Let's do this thing.
Shall we? I have a clicker box here, and I'm going to just try it, and we'll see.
Boom, alrighty.
Brilliant.
So
Yes.
my name's Andrew, and Q is next to me, and we're from a company called Kite. And so Kite's a service agency, and so we build digital products for a number of clients, like mentioned earlier, such as like the All Blacks, BP, Hull Pizza, and a number of government agencies as well. We also this year worked on Ripple, which is a contact tracing app. So you might have heard of that. We worked alongside the Ministry of Health to aid them in the fight against COVID-19. And so we're actually going to use some examples from that experience today to talk about conversational UX.
Yeah, it's very good stuff. We are also very keenly aware that we are the last thing between you and lunch. We're going to do our best not to make too many food-related puns. You will see a countdown at the upper area of our slides where we're counting down to lunch.
All right, let's go. So what is conversational UX? So the way we define it is a user interface that unfolds in a turn-based dialogue format over a period of time. So the most common ways you'd come across a conversational UX is through a chatbot, like a messenger, or maybe a voice assistant, so something like Alexa or Siri or something like that. And so for some of you, voice might be a bit of a mystery still. It's like, okay, don't really want to go there. But for some of you, it might be quite crucial. You know, it might be a big part of your day already. You might be setting alarms with Alexa. You might be sending messages with Siri. You might be ordering your flat white with your Google Assistant. And so for some people, it's really common. And actually, there's over 4 billion voice-enabled devices in the world today. And there's just going to be more and more, right? And so as that keeps growing, we see the future becoming more and more invisible, if you get what we mean. So the interfaces are now no longer visual, they're invisible. And so you might be thinking, hey, I'm a visual designer. What's happening to my career? Oh God, invisible interfaces. But that's why we're here to talk about conversational UX, how we think we can apply a lot of principles that you've learned from other discipline areas and apply them to invisible interfaces, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to give you some practical tips today. This is a very practical chat. We will have a little challenge to you at the end to try this and actually come back to us next year.
And maybe even a live demo.
Maybe even a live demo we'll do.
Let's
But just as a reminder, invisible interfaces can take all sorts of different forms. There can be artificial intelligence involved. There might not be. It might be a very sophisticated conversation tree. You might actually be making something for human operators, like if you have a lot of customer service reps and you want to give your users a consistent experience. For the purposes of a 20-minute overview, we're going to lump it all into the same kind of category because the principles are really the same. So don't worry too much if you're like, does it have to be a robot? Don't worry. So we want to talk about why it's awesome, and we have a couple of reasons here. We picked several of the many. The first reason that it is awesome so I'm a researcher, this is my total jam. It opens up a two-way dialogue with users, which is really, really exciting. So instead of just having comms going out and hoping that your users are getting the message, you can now open up a channel to hear exactly what they want. And for a researcher, that's really, really cool. I like to think of this as a dialogue as opposed to a broadcast, and I'll go into a little more detail on that later. Another cool thing, hey, increased performance and conversions. Everyone has KPIs, we're running businesses here, and conversational interfaces are a great way to sort of gently steer users towards CTAs that may have been more obvious to you than they are to your user. So that's a really valuable tool. It's really good for lead nurturing as well. And then, again, my little research heart just sings at this one. You have an always-on channel with low touch that gives you all sorts of rapid learnings to influence the design. I'll come back to that in a little more detail later. But these are just a couple of the reasons we love it. And here's a slide I don't expect you to read.
Yeah, so as you'll see on the slide, we've got a huge, really big, complicated, what happens in the behind the scenes for when we're designing these sort of interfaces. And so as you can see, if you're familiar with it, that's basically a really complicated decision tree. So really what we're doing is we're just programming a series of journeys and events to say, if someone does this, then hand them off to this next step or this next step. But the more questions you ask, the more complex and big it gets behind the scenes. And so the thing for me is, like, if you're a designer of any type, this is just a normal sort of concept that you'll be used to. There's a lot of complexity that goes behind the scenes of any product, whether it's visual, whether it's digital, whether it's invisible. And so it's our job as designers to hide that complexity. So for someone who's using this interface, it should be really straightforward. It should be feeling like, okay, cool, step 1, step 2, step 3, oh, that was easy. Whereas behind the scenes, there's all this complexity going on in the background. They could sign up for an account, they could be handed off to another service, there could be loads of information being loaded, all these different complexities. It's our job to keep them really simple, regardless of whether the interface is visual or invisible.
Yeah, and I have a point on here that, like, fine-tune the language before writing any code. The beauty about doing a big layout design like this, not to get into waterfall territory here, but the more you get this out on a page, this is actually in a Miro board, shout out, the easier it is to get your key stakeholders on board and excited and engaged and curious all at once. And we've found, like, just dumping comments in these boards gives us ideas for A/B tests and all sorts of other stuff. So
Demo.
We've whipped together a little demo. We're really hoping it works.
We have a little bot, and people say don't test things on stage with a phone and a microphone, but we're going to try. And the idea here is really to illustrate how there might be all this complexity in the background, but like a bot like this is only as good as you teach it to be. And we'll hopefully, let's see, should we do this?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go. I'm going to hold it right up to my mic. No, we'll do it here.
Hello there, I'm your UXNZ demo bot. What can I help you with today?
Okay, demo bot, what is the next item in the schedule today?
The next event is lunch, which begins at 12:20 p.m.
And what's after lunch today?
After that is all designers are going to hell with Rod Acevedo, which begins at 1:20 p.m.
And what's for lunch? What's on the menu?
Sorry, nobody told me what's on the menu, but I'm sure it will be delicious.
Well, hey, thank you. So, obviously, there's a lot that goes.
I didn't quite catch that.
Demo bot, just that's enough, thank you.
Good. Okay. Well,
Okay,
always.
if I can help you with anything else, simply
It's
start
done,
another
it's done, it's done, it's
conversation.
done.
So obviously there's, like, sophisticated stuff that goes into the back end there. That kind of bot needs to know the current time. It needs to know the whole agenda. If we had time and communication with the caterers, we probably would have put in the menu. But this just goes to show, to build a really, really simple, natural experience, you want to remove the complexity and just present the simplest options, and that takes some design.
For sure.
So we have 3 things that we want you to consider while you're doing your designs.
So we've got some basic things like context. And so context can influence privacy considerations. It can think about the time available to interact, think about the amount of characters users are willing to type, etc. And so think about things like, is this person, whether it's a chatbot or a voice interface, are they on the go? Or are they, sitting still and on the train or on a public transport? Are they in the privacy of their own home? Or are they in a public space? Are they using their personal device? Well, it's just my device. Or is it a public device? Is it a device that my whole family use? And so if you think about all those different considerations, it'll change the way you design these interfaces.
Yeah, I have an example from my time working on a voice-based interaction for a client in the insurance industry. And when we were testing, we found with the voice flow that people are really hesitant to say certain things aloud. So the point of this flow was to start gathering some information that would eventually lead to the customer getting a quote. But we found out that people don't want to say things like medical conditions or income levels or even their age. We had people saying, like, oh, I would lie about my age. So we found out through that process of elimination, people are not going to use this in any other context than the privacy of their own home. And that has implications for the entire rest of the flow.
And so the second consideration we have here is language. And so you need to be transparent about whether the user is interacting with a human or not. Use a consistent tone of voice and be careful with open prompts. And so when we talk about the interacting with a human or not, we've actually seen some really interesting stats and data based on if someone knows that they're interacting with a bot versus a human, they behave differently. they give different responses. They've got shorter responses. The same with if it's gendered, if it's male or female or something else, they interact differently with that bot. And it's incredible research, and we're probably not going to go into it in detail today, but feel free to come and talk to us about that, because it's quite interesting, especially you've done loads in that space.
Yeah,
right?
I've done some original research on the gender presentation of bots and how users use them. I did that research with Optimal Workshop, shout out, I don't mean to be shouting out all of our sponsors today, but that's just ending up happening. We'll see if I can get Adobe in there too. It's really fascinating stuff, and it can have, again, big implications for how people are going to approach your flow. I just want to touch on open prompts here. I recently saw a design for a conversation that asked the user for their location, but didn't actually give any hint as to what kind of location that they would accept. So there was kind of a sense that you could say, like, Harborside, or 45 Taranaki Street, or any kind of input. But in the back end, the flow would only accept a couple of preset inputs, and they were all city names. So with a visual design, you can hint to this. You can hint the user to what kind of input you're expecting. You can say, hey, use this drop-down tool, and they can select from that. You can have an address finder that they're going to be able to input into. But with an invisible interface, you have to be much more explicit about what the rules are, or else it's just going to start generating error messages, and that's really frustrating.
Mm-hmm. And so the last consideration we have here is time. And so that sort of bounces off what Q's just saying here. And so micro interactions really matter. And I think we know that when we're thinking about visual interfaces. So we've got some examples, like on the screen here, you can see those 3 little dots. And I think most of us understand that if we're in a chat interface and we see 3 little dots bouncing up and down, it means there's something about to happen. Someone's sending a message to us. And so, okay, cool, while I haven't got new information, I know it's on the way. Just like if you see a little spinning icon on a screen, that means loading, right? Everyone gets that. Everyone knows, oh, there's some big complex data being loaded up. I'm about to be presented it. Okay, let's just wait. It's coming. In an invisible interface, how do you do that? If you're in a voice interaction and you say, okay, tell me the weather, and it's big and complicated, or you have low data, how do you inform your user that it's coming, work on it, we just haven't got it yet? And to be honest, we haven't fully solved this problem either. And so I think that's something that we're really interested to see as invisible interfaces continue to grow. How do we as a community solve that problem? I'd love to talk about that as well if you're interested in that one.
Yeah, one thing we do know from research is that however you fill that time, however you indicate the current status, I mean, it's a classic usability heuristic, right? Visibility into system status. However you indicate that, the time is important. It's important to take enough time. Doing some research, I had a participant tell me about another voice interaction that we were designing. They thought that the bot hadn't heard their request properly because it gave them an answer too quickly. Even though the answer that the bot was providing was actually correct, they didn't trust that it was real because it hadn't taken the time to think about their response the way a human would. So time is important. Don't over-optimize your, if you are using AI, don't over-optimize it to the point where it spits out answers too fast. You can artificially build in that time if you have to.
Boom.
Let's talk about testing.
Let's talk about testing. So we've got 2 slides on testing. Testing before you build and testing after you build. And so up on the slide, you'll see the concept of Wizard of Oz. So Wizard of Oz the heck out of your design. What do we mean by that? Basically, what we mean is fake it till you make it. Basically, just build enough to test. So you might be familiar with that sort of concept from other types of design, like paper prototyping. You don't need to invest loads of like coding and build and all that stuff to build a product and then test with users. You can mock something up on paper and put it in front of someone and say, hey, how do you think this flow works? It's the exact same with these interfaces here. In fact, you'll probably, hopefully, maybe some of you were aware the little demo we did wasn't really a bot. It was just a recording.
Sorry.
And the whole point, again, this is just, we built just enough before, like today, just to test it out with our audience. And so Q's done the exact same in their past, where you've built out, literally had someone on the end of a phone to test out a voice interaction. And you've had people think, oh no, it's definitely a bot.
That's obviously a bot. That's obviously not a person. But it was actually a person just doing a good enough job. Fake, hey, we have our bot in the back. Sorry, she was my substitute bot once. People Sorry? Seeing you there? I have lost my train of thought, but
basically,
treat it like you would
go.
with any other kind of prototype. Just build enough to learn from it, and then the rest can be constructed from there.
Totally.
I'm going to talk about testing after you build. So looking around this room, I'm sure we all have research methodologies in our toolkit. So I assume you're probably going to build in stuff like testing, usability, interview-based research is really, really good for testing invisible interfaces. But remember, as soon as you release this thing out into the wild, you are going to get so much data, you need to have a plan for what you're going to do with it. So as soon as it's deployed, even in just an early phase, you're going to get all sorts of responses, both quant and qual. And so the key is to have a plan for what you're going to do with it. Have a plan for where that data is going to be stored. Have a plan for how it's going to be used. Have a plan for how to make the most meaningful information accessible to the key teammates who are able to, iterate on the design based on that data. So it's always on, it's low touch, and if you don't have a plan for what to do with it as it comes in, it can be really, really overwhelming. So plan carefully.
The icing on the cake. We're getting close to lunch.
The icing on the cake. That sounds a little bit like a food pun.
Yeah.
So here is the secret superpower of invisible flows, conversational UX, is that you can use what users are telling you to inform the rest of your design. So if you have other existing products or services, whether they're visual or not, you can use the input that you're getting, that always-on sort of research, to influence what you're putting on your site. For example, you might find that people are asking a lot for something that you thought was really obvious on the website when you designed it. Actually, you have user feedback telling you that that's not the case. So you can make changes based on that. There's also the advantage of being able to speak the language that users are speaking as well. So you can hear them asking for it in their own language, which helps us to get out of our little jargony bubbles that we are all in.
Totally. So we actually saw this type of thing happen when we built Ripple, and so we had a really simple chatbot on our site just to help deal with frequently asked questions. People say, hey, will this work with the ministry codes or whatever it is? And so they'll ask questions, our bot would serve up an answer. When the bot didn't have the answer, we'd hand off to a human. But the next time someone asked the same question, the bot now had the answer because we were learning as we go. And so that's an example of fixing the FAQ, but also that would apply to bigger products. So it could apply to features. So it could inform our backlog for the next features we release. Someone might say, hey, how come I can't check in using Bluetooth or whatever it is? We go, oh, great, thank you. You've literally told us what you want, as opposed to maybe a visual interface where you might know someone's sitting on a screen for ages and looking around and maybe hitting a button and going back, hitting a button and going back. But you don't necessarily know exactly what they're looking for. You have to infer, or you have to hope that they come to you. Whereas in a conversational UX, they normally ask for it directly. So you have all that information right at your hands.
Right, so you're probably already using heat maps. This is like heat maps plus you get the actual context of what they're trying to do. It removes a lot of guesswork. Yeah, so that's our practical advice for you. Our challenge to you is to just try it out. Mm-hmm. You can even make a dummy Wizard of Oz type prototype like what we showed today. Just try it out, get enough to use, and get some feedback on, and then come back next year and tell us how it went. Yeah, and that's an assumption that we'll be back next year, so to the organizers. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Nice one.
That was amazing.